Today, we're going to dive into one of the most successful, entertaining, and, yeah, controversial figures in sports history, Earl Weaver. He was the baseball manager who was part genius, part showman, and just completely unforgettable. To really get a feel for Earl Weaver, you have to understand the spectacle. And this quote, it just nails it. You see, fans didn't just go to a baseball game, they went to the Earl Weaver show. His blow-ups on the field were absolutely legendary, turning a simple argument into pure theater. So first, let's just get into that public persona, the showman and the screamer that umpires and fans either loved or, really, really hated. Weaver's anger wasn't just yelling. No, it was creative. It was almost an art form. He'd kick dirt all over an umpire's shoes. He'd spin his hat around backwards in this fit of rage. He once even stole second base in the middle of an argument. He was also a chain smoker, and umps knew it. They'd sometimes poke him in the chest just to crush the pack of cigarettes in his pocket and get him to erupt. I mean, it was pure theater. And his fame went way beyond the ballpark. You have to understand, back in 1983, getting interviewed by Playboy was a huge cultural deal. And there he was, right next to a media mogul like Ted Turner and a literary giant like Stephen King. Weaver had broken out of baseball and become a real piece of Americana. So this brings us to the central paradox of Earl Weaver. How could this shouting, dirt-kicking, kind of ridiculous character also be one of the most successful leaders the game has ever seen? That's the real question we're going to try to unravel. To really get his success, we have to look past the caricature, past the yelling, and at the stunning numbers behind the man. Okay, forget the antics for a second and just let this number sink in. 95. Under Weaver, the Baltimore Orioles won an average of 95 games a year. In a 162-game season, that is just sustained, unbelievable excellence. This wasn't a flash in the pan. This was a dynasty. His success was, frankly, undeniable. He took his team to the World Series 4 times. During his time as manager, the Orioles won over 100 more games than the next best team in all of baseball. And here's the real kicker. He's now seen as a pioneer of analytics, the original Moneyball guy, decades before that was even a word. So we're right back at that central question. How do you square these two things, the screaming showman on one side and the analytical genius on the other? It doesn't seem like it should fit in the same person, but it did. All right, this brings us to his actual method. How in the world did he do it? Let's break down the leadership philosophy that became known as the Weaver Way. It all started with one simple, almost ruthless principle. Weaver was a master at filtering out the noise. He didn't hold grudges. He completely ignored problems that didn't directly help him win baseball games. His entire world was just the core mechanics of the game. He basically started a revolution. The old school way of baseball was all about small ball, bunting a runner over, stealing a base, playing by your gut. Weaver, he threw all that out. His analysis showed him what really won games, getting runners on base and waiting for the big 3-run homer. All of it backed by solid pitching and defense. It sounds kind of obvious now, but back then it was totally radical. And this focus on the process, it had a very predictable result. His teams didn't always fly out of the gate in April, but because they were so fundamentally sound, they just kept accumulating good habits. And over a long season, those habits paid off. They would consistently just dominate the second half of the year. His approach to people was just as unique and honestly, completely counterintuitive. He believed that if a player was in a slump, you leave them alone. They were already putting enough pressure on themselves. But his stars, guys like Hall of Fame pitcher Jim Palmer, he pushed them relentlessly because he was convinced they always had more to give. He focused on squeezing every last drop of performance out of his best players. This quote, from one of his own books, is just pure Weaver. He actually hung this sign in the clubhouse. Despite all his success, he never stopped questioning. He never stopped learning. He had what we'd now call a growth mindset, driven by this idea that the only way to stay on top was to keep finding new ideas. And believe me, he was always looking for that edge. He was the first manager to really embrace the radar gun, using it to time outfielders' arms, not just pitchers' fastballs. He'd use these bizarre pinch-hitting strategies nobody had ever thought of. He even found a loophole in the new designated hitter rule that was so effective, Major League Baseball literally had to rewrite the rulebook just to stop him. So let's circle all the way back to those legendary arguments. Were they just an uncontrolled sideshow? Him losing his temper? Not at all. It was a strategic tool. He'd sometimes turn to his coach and say, "Watch this," and then go perform for the crowd. It fired up his players. It took the pressure off them, and it showed everybody in that stadium just how desperately he wanted to win. So Weaver was clearly a genius for his time. But this all raises a really critical question about his legacy. Could his style of leadership actually work today? Well, the manager's job has fundamentally changed. Back in Weaver's day, the manager was an autocrat. The entire traveling staff was maybe 30 people, and he was the undisputed king. Today, that staff is closer to 75 people, with analysts, psychologists, all kinds of specialized coaches. The modern manager isn't a dictator, they're a collaborator. And that's really why he's often called the last manager. He represents a totally bygone era. He was the boss, the guy who figured out the secrets to winning pretty much by himself, with his own intelligence, decades before teams had whole departments dedicated to it. He was a bridge between the old world and the new. So let's make this personal. I want you to really think about it. Looking at the whole package, the genius, the rage, the incredible results, would you hire Earl Weaver to run your company today? Well, the author who studied him for years is pretty clear on this. And the short answer is no, not today. In our collaborative, HR-sensitive world, the risks of his abrasive style would just be way too high. What worked in the 1970s just wouldn't fly in the 2020s. But, and this is a really big but, that doesn't mean his legacy is irrelevant. You just have to separate the outdated methods from the man's timeless essence. What made him so special was this raw, almost Shakespearean intelligence, a street hustler's drive for any little edge, a deep understanding of people, and an absolute intense love of the fight. And that's the ultimate takeaway here. You probably wouldn't want Earl Weaver as the boss today. But ask yourself this. Could your team, your company, your project be better with someone who had that much passion, that much intelligence, and that profound desire to win? Yeah, absolutely. That kind of fire is something any team would be lucky to have.